So we have around 3 million non-permanent resident visa holders in Canada whose visas will be either not renewed or expiring over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And many of them will not have a pathway to citizenship. And this is going to create a major problem for future Canadian governments, because either these folks do go home or they do something else, which is
Mhm.
something that Michael, my co-author, and I have talked about in our Wall Street Journal article, which was they will turn to the south and come across the border.
Hi, I'm Alex Dalziel, a senior fellow and national security project lead at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Welcome to Inside Policy Talks. Today, I'm joined by Jamie Tronnes, the executive director for MLI's branch in Washington, D.C., which is the Center for North American Prosperity and Security, often known as SYNAPS. Jamie is going to talk to us today about some of her recent observations on the Canada-U.S. border, its security, and its management. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
It's great to have you here. So let's just start maybe with a little bit of the background to what we're going to talk about here, about immigration policy, primarily in Canada, and how it's affecting the Canada-U.S. border. What's been going on in Canadian immigration policy over the last few months?
Yeah, so originally, Canada has always had this sort of world-class merit-based immigration system that has really been responsive to the labor market in a way that a lot of other countries are quite envious of. And because of that, we've been able to really keep our economy booming by bringing in workers when we need them, and sort of being able to turn the taps off when the economy slows down, so that we can kind of keep our electoral, sorry, not our electoral, our work and immigration balance in such a way that our unemployment rate doesn't spike. That's been the case for Canada's immigration system for a long time, and it's really helped Canadians be very supportive of immigration, because there hasn't been this sense that people are coming and taking Canadian jobs.
Mhm.
There's been more of a sense that people are coming to help Canada grow and to really supply workers when we need them for our industries,
Something of a
especially.
Canadian consensus almost, hey, Jamie? I mean, that's what
Exactly.
we
It's
described.
been referred to as the Canadian consensus. And I think I once upon a time was a special assistant to the immigration minister in Canada, and things have changed significantly since then. So since COVID, the Liberal government decided to really turn the taps on and just open the door and let a lot of people in. And they did this because there was a dearth of skilled workers, as there always is in many sectors. They had claimed that the low birth rate, which is roughly 1.3 children per woman versus the 2.4 birth rate globally, localized labor shortages, meant that it was time that they could wipe the backlog clean, get a lot of people who've been waiting in line into Canada, and allow for a huge increase in the numbers. Their plan originally had been to increase the numbers to 500,000 permanent residents annually
Okay.
over 3 years, and then reestablishing, looking at the numbers.
Well, just
And
to pause you on that, I mean,
yeah,
so raising it to 500,000, but from what level?
exactly. So that is a historic high, and it really wasn't backed up by the labor data. So this was
Okay.
really a big change, in that it was no longer a labor driven policy where we saw we needed workers. It was really, the thought was, we'll clean up the immigration backlog, we'll let a lot more people in, and we'll increase the population numbers as we go forward. But really, there wasn't a strong justification for changing the policy so radically, because the numbers just don't bear it out. You're
Yeah.
adding 1.5 million permanent residents to a country of, at the time of planning this, was 39 million people. That's a lot of people to be adding in a short period of time.
Hmm.
And in addition to that, the Liberal government were also approving at record numbers temporary foreign workers. So just to give you an idea, in 2023 alone, the Trudeau government issued 4,303,301 work permits, either issued or extended. And again, that's 4 million work permits in a country of 40 million people. That's a lot. Now, not all those folks are staying long term. Some of those are very, very short term. So the rough sort of estimate at the moment is that Canada has about just under 3 million non-permanent residents. So that's temporary foreign workers, student visa holders who are working in Canada at the moment. And a lot of those folks have felt that they were invited. The government slogan was to come and stay, that you could come, you could study, you could work, and you could stay. That was sort of the implicit promise in this. But that's a lot of, to say you're dividing 3 million temporary work permit holders into 500,000 permanent resident status applications. And now what's happened is the government has realized that high unemployment rates in Canada, even in Alberta, which has historically been the driver of temporary foreign workers, because the economy's been very hot there and they've really needed temporary foreign workers to keep things moving. The unemployment rate just doesn't bear out the numbers of temporary foreign workers that are coming in. And Canadians have started to really feel the pinch. Things have really changed. So the government has changed tack. And now they've gone from having the doors wide open to starting to slowly close the doors. And a lot of people who came here thinking that they could apply and stay, who spent a lot of money getting into Canada, are now finding out that there isn't going to be a pathway for them to stay in Canada, or the pathway that might be available to them is extremely competitive. So we have around 3 million non-permanent resident visa holders in Canada whose visas will be either not renewed or expiring over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And many of them will not have a pathway to citizenship. And this is going to create a major problem for future Canadian governments, because either these folks do go home or they do something else, which is something that Michael, my co-author, and I have talked about in our Wall Street Journal article, which was they will turn to the south and come across the border. And that is
I think that's kind of on for, like, most people wouldn't think of that. They typically think of, U.S. policy driving people north, etc. So that's a fairly novel observation.
Yeah, and the data really bears it out, that there's a lot more folks who are coming south than going north, and there's a couple reasons for that. We talk about the quality of living in Canada as being, now post-COVID, things have skyrocketed in price, but also with the numbers of people that we have in Canada, and there's some debate over whether or not this is entirely due to immigration, and probably it isn't, but there's certainly a lot. The fact is that there are housing shortages all over Canada. And the fact is also that Canadians have a higher standard of living than immigrants who come to Canada, particularly foreign students. Many surveys have been done on foreign students and their accommodations, and many of them are living in substandard accommodations, to say the very least. And so they're not thriving when they come to Canada. They're not able to make a living in the way that they thought they might be able to. Some of them are still paying off the debt that they may have incurred to come to Canada. And if you look south, there is, in the United States, already an underground labor market that's been well established, just because of the sheer volume of people coming across the southern border here in the U.S. And so coming into the United States and going into that underground market is a little bit easier, but you're also looking at a less expensive quality of living. You can go from state to state. There's a lot of different states. Some states have sanctuary cities where you can get a lot more support. And there's a lot more networks down here. But I think the overarching draw is the American dollar. It's if you're looking to send money back home or pay off debts in a foreign country, paying it in U.S. dollars is much more preferable, and than paying it in Canadian dollars, for sure.
Yeah. So that's a few of the kind of southward pulls for sure. One thing just to maybe have you expand on a bit. You've talked about all kinds of people looking to extend their visas, etc. But my sense is that Canada is kind of doesn't entirely have a handle on the extent of people that are here. Did your numbers include those who perhaps have overstayed their visas, who are off the radar, but we believe are still in Canada?
No, Canada has very poor data on the number of what we would call illegal immigrants in Canada, and we just don't really track very well and do a lot of research on that. So we don't know when people have left the country in a way that some other countries do keep track of. And it's I haven't actually been able to find too many overstay numbers because again, it's hard to find that data. There's a lot of other privacy reasons in Canada, privacy laws that make it difficult for immigration to maybe respond to requests for information on specific cases about that as well. But when we look at the data that we can get from the United States for people crossing over, it really bears out that there has been a massive spike in people coming across the Canada-American border, particularly in geographically dense areas such as the New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont border. That is where majority of the crossings happen, primarily because it's close to, it's a land border for one thing. You can drive across it, but
Right.
secondarily, it's where it's closer to two of the major pull cities for immigrants in Canada, which are Toronto and Montreal. And so it's the easiest place if you are there to cross into the U.S., whether legally or illegally.
Yeah, that's the important geographic dynamic there. So, if we look at this and over the last few years, I mean, we've seen in the U.S., I mean, immigration is definitely a hot button topic in the current election. I think it's fair to say the trend lines are all for getting, tighter immigration there. It suggests to me that this is definitely a continental challenge and certainly one that Canada and the U.S. Have to work together on. Do you have any, given that you're sitting in Washington and seeing this, kind of unfold around you, both the U.S. debate and then the U.S. debate in relation to Canada, what should Canada be doing here? What are some good policy ideas and approaches that we might take up, after next week's election?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Look, so from January to September, the CBP officers down here recorded over 198,000 encounters with foreign nationals crossing the northern border. These are generally people who have crossed with the intention of surrendering themselves to CBP to claim asylum. To put this in perspective, we're looking at almost 200,000 encounters, not even to the end of this year, just in the first from January to September. And in 2021, for the whole year, there were only 20,000 encounters. So it's up huge numbers. And part of this is something that Canada and the US might need to talk about, which is the Safe Third Country Agreement. So people are coming across and surrendering themselves for asylum because they believe or have been led to believe by TikTok accounts or surreptitious poor advice, or even just people who are looking to traffic them across the border, that if they
Human
surrender
smugglers
themselves,
and criminal elements.
exactly, people who make money off of this sort of thing, if they surrender themselves to CBP at the border, that they can claim asylum, they'll be able to have their case heard either very quickly, or once they're granted asylum or a date to have their asylum case heard, it could take as long as 7 to 10 years for that to happen. And in the meantime, they are given the permit to work. And the loophole with the Safe Third Country Agreement in people coming from Canada to the United States and vice versa is that if they have a relative down here, or they can prove that they have a work sponsorship, then they are able to claim asylum in the United States, even after spending time in Canada, and vice versa. And this is not necessarily a problem, but it is a problem of resources, in that the Customs Border Patrol down here just really don't have the resources available for the surge that's coming across the northern border that's really changed direction in the last 3 years to net increase in the U.S. because people coming across don't speak languages. So a majority of them are coming from India. I think something like 60% of people crossing the border are from India as a source country. And so you think about the translators that are required that CBP typically or maybe just don't have access to in real time on the Eastern Seaboard to have an officer adjudicate their case right there and then.
Right.
And this is lending itself to all kinds of challenges, legal challenges, and other problems that are going to create a long-term sort of issue for the U.S. system when it comes to adjudicating these asylum claims. The other thing that Canada really needs to do is look at this as a trade issue and a security issue, in that we don't want the flow of goods and people to stop along our border. We literally can't afford it. There's so much trade that goes across all over the Canadian-U.S. border that it is in everyone's interest to keep the borders open and flowing with goods and people for the mutual prosperity of both of our countries. And to that extent, we need to think of this as an economic and a security angle, in that if Canada can start keeping better track of those people that we have let in, all those millions of people that are in Canada, either temporarily or permanently, and when they are leaving the country, that will help us to be able to show America that we're taking this seriously, that the border and our relationship doesn't have to change, that Canada's got the back of the United States and is taking this issue seriously. So to that extent, we need to deploy more people along the border, particularly in what is called the Swan sector, along the border of New York, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
Mhm. Yeah, it's been a recurrent issue in some of my discussions about the need for having a more looking at the Canada's approach to border management, border security, and how we handle the ports of entry and in between. Well, Jamie, I think you've given us a really concise take on this issue. I don't know if you have any final thoughts you wanted to throw in.
Yeah, just because the election is next week, I will say that I have met with members of Congress and senators on this issue on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, and both of them are very concerned about it. A lot of legislative folks that I've spoken with, whether Democrat or Republican, this is happening in people's backyard. Literally, people are crossing the border in their backyard. And it's on the news regularly in the Eastern Seaboard here, on local news channels. There's videos of people crossing. And so it is an issue that is no longer just for the southern border, although granted, the numbers there are far different than they are in the north. But it is something that both sides of the aisle are concerned with. And so I don't think it matters who wins the election next week. It's still going to be an issue that is going to be ongoing.
Well, we will certainly keep an eye on it. Jamie, you've been doing a great job of that. So really appreciate you bringing this perspective to both Canadians and Americans, hopefully on this issue from your perch in Washington, looking at it from that side of the border. So thanks for bringing this to our attention. And for viewers, I will put attachments, links to a couple of the articles and data that Jamie has mentioned. And until next time, see you again on Inside Policy Talks.